The monsoon of 2000 was the worst they had ever known. Buildings destroyed. Possessions gone. Thousands of people homeless. It hit the south of the city like a tidal wave. And in its path, a library. The Khan collection was here, one of the world's finest of Urdu books and periodicals dating from the 17th century. Many handwritten, irreplaceable, priceless.
This water was flood water. It has vegetables, it has sewage water, it has filth, unbelievable filthy water. At that time we never bothered about it. Smell, we never even felt that there is a foul smell coming. Everybody's mind is set on the book, the floating book.
The books were owned by a consortium of universities in the United States.
Well, it was disbelief, and then there was just a gut-wrenching realization that we were in for quite a long haul of agony. My initial sense was one of loss, and I suppose in some ways it was like experiencing a death in the family. The very first advice was move quickly to make sure that the worst of what had accumulated from the flooding on the books was washed free.
Nothing like this had ever happened. There was no cash to pay for help. The consortium needed suggestions.
Everybody said freeze. Freeze as solidly and as at low temperatures as possible from the beginning.
We hired the space the next day, around 8,000 cubic feet space. But that space can hold only up to 60,000 books, but we have a collection of 100,000 books. So what to do?
The word was that a Canadian company, Cromwell Restoration, had a process that might save the books.
Our connection with the Canadian firm came together within, I think, just about a month and a half of the experience itself, the flooding. The advice that we did receive from Library of Congress, from the University of Chicago, from Columbia University, from Harvard, all pointed in the same direction.
The Canadians visited Hyderabad to see the books 5 months after the flood.
Yeah, it was like, meeting some angels. I know I'm being sentimental, but it was sentimental for us.
At the SVK, they met the secretary, Sambi Reddy. He took them to the freezer company where the books were stored. But what they found there was far worse than they expected. The books in deep freeze were safe, but thousands more were in the cooler room, above freezing point. Mold would have started within 2 days, and 5 months had passed.
Saw for the first time the books that were not even frozen, they were only refrigerated. So much damage had been done. We weren't sure initially what our success rate would be. It was pretty bad.
And there was more. Another 20,000 had been air-dried, and the air pollution in Hyderabad attacks paper.
The majority of the people in Hyderabad use two-cycle engines, and everybody drives either a motorcycle or an auto. They do produce quite a bit of pollution. This pollution reverts back onto the books as acid.
Chemicals would reverse this damage, but for most of the books, something radical was needed. The Cromwell report was clear. The only process for an entire library was thermal vacuum freeze drying. It was expensive, best done in Canada. But the books could not leave India. The solution?
No, that's
Airlift the
right.
Cromwell
That's right.
machine weighing 8 tons to Hyderabad.
Here we go. It's the 11th to 13th of May. It'd be my objective to have it done by Christmas. Whether it happens, I'm not sure.
These are large blocks of money that we're looking at. Relatively small, I suppose, on scale of international economies. But in the world of libraries, $250,000 to seed this activity is large by any university standards.
It took over a year to raise the funds to use the freeze dryer. So it wasn't till May 2002, 21 months after the flood, that the freeze dryer arrived. But now there was another problem, the India-Pakistan conflict. All of a sudden, it seemed the Canadians were actually in danger.
I had woken up fairly early to give my wife a call at home. She had stated to me, "Are you leaving?" And I said, "No, why?" She says, "Well, in the newspapers, they're calling for this major strike to happen between Pakistan and India." And then the threat of nuclear warheads were being used.
As the day progressed, as information came in that we had to leave, there was a lot of anxiety because our planning was to have at least a week of training. Suddenly we had to leave. And so we were faced with the realization, how are we going to convey all this information, potentially leave the equipment at risk, and jump on a plane? Suddenly, when we had all the pieces in place for the first time, the only thing we didn't have was time. As we worked our way through the equipment, the various circuits and switches and so on, not really knowing at times how some would react. And suddenly there we were with yet another challenge, and believe it or not, we had to leave for the airport. You know, if I recall, it was within minutes or something.
Marshal kept telling, "Oh, come on, let's go this time," because we have to check in 3 hours before. There's hardly any time. Poor fellows, they have not even eaten that day.
2 weeks of training in one night and no dry run.
What happened? Did someone kick the plug? Can you check, please?
Here, we have to go.
No, we can't do it like this.
Just a second.
Just a second.
What happened?
We're going to have to put this together another way. Don't worry about it, we'll make it work. But for the moment, let's keep our schedule. Let's go.
If you can't get the part number off of it, email me the part
Come on,
number.
you can go tomorrow.
We can't.
One day.
The government has told us to leave now.
And this was to have been a celebration. It took 10 days of emails, faxes and midnight phone calls before they were ready to start the machine. The first 2,000 books came out of deep freeze in June 1992, almost 2 years after the flood. And so the restoration began. That was a week like no other. But finally, they began the close-down cycle and waited. The paper had survived. The ink had survived. They had succeeded. And every week, for the next 20 weeks, There was celebration in that room. The Canadians were here to celebrate for sure. But there was another reason. The freeze dryer was leaving. Already there was a new crisis in Europe.